Hi, and good evening. Welcome to our Farm Talk series at the Connecticut Grange. My name's Jean Pillow, and I work for the Eastern Connecticut Conservation District, along with my co-worker, Maura Robies, who is in the back of the room, and most of you have already been in contact with. Just want to say our Farm Talk series has been funded in part by a National Association of Conservation Districts Technical Assistance Grant, and in partnership with the Connecticut Grange number 40 and the Woodstock Agricultural Commission. The Eastern Connecticut Conservation District is a nonprofit natural resource conservation organization. We were created by state statute, meaning that we have specific role that we're supposed to be serving to the citizens in Connecticut. Among them are to do watershed management investigations and conduct workshops for the people and entities in our communities. We are a non-regulatory commission. I just want to make that clear. And there are 5 conservation districts in the state of Connecticut. We are the one in the east. So if you don't know your compass points, that's where we are. 36 municipalities from the Massachusetts border to the Long Island Sound, and from Rhode Island all the way 36 towns to the west. One of our current projects is a water quality investigation and production of a watershed-based plan for the Little River watershed. And we are currently, those of us in this room, in the Little River watershed. It includes parts of Woodstock, parts of Thompson, parts of Putnam, parts of Pomfret, and a little bit of Southbridge, Massachusetts as well. This is all the land that drains from the Little River into the Quinnebog River in Putnam. Our goal is to write a watershed-based plan that will help get this watershed designated as a National Water Quality Initiative watershed, or NAQUI, for the purpose of making it easier for the farming community to get grant funding to help them with projects that will improve water quality and soil health and general health of things on their farms. So right now our focus is on the Little River. If you're not in the Little River watershed, we still care about your farm, which is why we opened up the talk to more than just this immediate area. We may be looking into doing future NAQUI watershed designations, for example, in the Natchog watershed, but that'll depend on time and funding in the future. So the map that we have of the Little River watershed, if you're in that watershed, we'd love to hear from you and maybe come out and do a free farm assessment. So we are doing a survey. The link to the survey is in the chat for those of you on Zoom. We want to learn a little bit more about your farm. We're not going to be sharing your information with anybody. We're just getting some general data, and it may be a way for us to determine what kind of programming in the future would be of interest to the people in Eastern Connecticut. Also, for those in the Little River, you can request a free farm evaluation. Maura or myself will come out and do this evaluation of your farm and give you some guidance and steer you in the right direction if you'd qualify for grant funding for bigger projects. So with that, I'm going to introduce our speaker, Jim Hyde. He's our state agronomist. He works for the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. And the topic of his talk tonight is manure and nutrient management on small farms. Can you share, Jim?
Yep, I will. Right, and you're muted.
Action.
Okay. Just a quick feedback that people online can hear.
If you're online, oh, I'm unmuted.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Just quick feedback if anybody can hear.
Yep, all good.
Great, thank you, Ben. Okay, we'll get going here. All right, I want to thank you very much for letting me come and be with you this evening. This is something that I like a lot. Just a quick reminisce. I was actually first in this room about 25 years ago with some fellow farmers talking about some of the same stuff. Back in 96 to 99, the Clean Water Act had come back to expand to include some of the farming land. And so there were some new regulations that came about in 96 and 99 related to farming, and it was a big deal at that time. Now, 25 years later, we're still talking about it, but we've really made some significant progress in that time. But it's something that I've had a chance to work with, and I absolutely love it. It's an opportunity to work with farms, to work with animals, and to work with soils and plants. And I love that interconnectedness of it all, the cyclical part of it. So what I have an opportunity to talk with you about tonight is really just about the farm and the animal production and how to identify some of the sources of loss, the source streams of loss from the farm, and then some ideas on what we do to assess that and give some ideas on how to manage those things and how you can use those products to your advantage. So that's the goal. You let me know how I do here. Very open to questions. I'd like to make this very relevant to you, to your farm, to your land, to the things that you do. So I would like to ask, just so I'm not speaking at you, would anybody volunteer what kind of farms or land that you work with? Anyone? Can I pick on you?
Sure.
You have some land and animals? Okay. Gotcha. Yep. That sounds familiar. Sounds great. All right. What about you guys? Horse farm. Love it. All right. We work with a few of those. Last one. Fantastic. I'm sitting. All right. So we do have an opportunity. We get to work with a lot of different people. So some of the animals that we've worked with that we write plans with USDA. I guess I didn't introduce myself. I do work with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I work on the technical side of things. My background is in soils and soil nutrition. I've done a lot of work, used to do a lot of work with soil nitrogen. When I moved here to Connecticut in '96, had an opportunity to work with soil phosphorus. And I've been working with soil phosphorus and soil nutrient management since then. But what I have been working with the most is what we call the soil nutrient management on animal farms. So I had a chance to work with a lot of dairy farms. I covered a lot of the eastern side of Connecticut, and a counterpart, Rich Miner, worked on the western side of the Connecticut. And we would go to the farms, we would do an assessment, how many animals there are, how many acres there are, and then we would put together a plan on how to use those manures for the fertilizer value. So many years later, still doing that and loving it. And we've had an opportunity to go out to a number of different farms throughout the state. It's been really interesting to watch the transition of the state and some of the dairy farms that are changing businesses. But really, a lot of what has been so successful, it seems like, is the direct sales. So being able to market directly to the people, to the restaurants, that seems to be a really good thing for Connecticut agriculture. So the diversity is really, the diversity of farms has really increased a lot that we get to work with. So one of the different aspects, though, is it's really important that we understand what some of the goals are of the farm. And so these are some of the common lists, the common common reasons that we hear people are working with their farms and the things that they love about working on a farm or owning a farm. And there's a lot of different reasons on here, hoping that you might be able to recognize or relate to some of these on here. But regardless of the goals, seems like there's always that common interest in there about caring for the land. Every farm that we get to work with, one of the highest priorities for them is getting to take care of the land, to make sure that it's going to be around to continue working for them and for future generations as well. So what does that mean, though, if you say that you want to take care of the land? And it can mean a lot of different things, but just for this presentation here, what I'm going to present with you is basically, sorry, I got lost here. To be stewards of the land, to take care of the land, in this case is going to be to identify some of the wastes that are leaving the farm and how to prevent them from leaving the farm, but then contain them and use them for their benefit, for the benefit of the land. So if we're doing this well, if we're writing up a good plan, it will be good for business. It should be increase efficiency, and then it'll help. Oftentimes, it will help with the soil productivity, the soil nutrition, and again, if we're writing a nice plan that works with the farm, we'll end up with the good soils and clean water as well. So every farm is unique. You can't go to one farm and expect to see the same situation out there. Between the animals, the infrastructure, the hills, the slopes, and the soils, but most of all, the people. So the people effect really has a big effect on the plan and what things to consider in the plan. And the people as both the surrounding people, but also who's working the farm. Just the way that you manage the farm, the amount of time that they have to put into the farm, the different types of equipment, it's really critical to be able to look at all these different things. But recognizing that there's all those differences out there, there are still a number of things that are consistent across there. And so if we lump those similarities together, when we go out to a farm, we can oftentimes find these 6 different things that are on a farm. And these 6 different things are the common losses on the farm. So if there's something that's moving off the farm that has nutrients in it or soil, that's moving soil off the field, we can often put that into one of 6 different categories. So I was going to offer to talk about each one of these categories, hoping that each one of these categories is something that you can have something in mind, maybe at your farm or something that you know in the area. So of those 6 common types of losses on the farms, what we try to do is we try to figure out a way how to capture and then contain those waste streams that are on there. And again, if we can capture them and then use them for their good, we'll often see improvements in the soil health, the soil nutrition, and then thus in the plant productivity, plant yield as well. So capture, contain, and reuse. That's kind of the mantra throughout this whole presentation. But by creating a more sustainable farm operation, we're hoping that we can reduce some of the inputs, some of the costs, such as fertilizer, the fertilizer equivalent from the manure, and then also the feed, if we can help improve some of those yields, hoping to cut back on some of the costs for the farm. But the cyclical nature of growing the crops, creating the feed, generating the manure, and then getting that manure back onto the crops, we can achieve that by capturing some of those waste streams and closing that loop. So instead of having a linear cycle of crops, feed, and then manure, and then loss, where we can't get that manure or those nutrients back, we can close that loop, get it back on the crops. So just to talk about the 6 different losses that we commonly see on the farms. Some of the solutions to capture that waste or prevent that waste from leaving is to put a roof over it So if we can prevent the precipitation and the snow from coming down on it, then we can keep the manure in place. Oftentimes we'll recommend some type of a hard surface, the hard surface to work on if it's particularly in the wet, rainy season, snow melt. But it also keeps that material from seeping through the soil as well. So if you've got a continuous source of waste or manure in the same place, eventually that stuff is going to leach through some of the soil, and you'll get what we would call a hot soil. It's got a lot of nutrients in it. So we'll often put in something impervious or something hard underneath of it to be able to keep all the water and all the nutrients in there. Other things that we're using a lot right now is this bedded pack. Is anybody familiar with the bedded pack concept with the animals? It's something where you've got a nice large area for the animals. But by large, I mean enough walking space for them to move around. So it'd be the equivalent of a small barnyard. So an area that's fenced and contained, but the animals can go out and they can wander freely in this bedded pack area. But then you've got a nice layer of bedding on the bottom, on the base. So something that's been working really well is to use something like wood chips. So a nice coarse wood chip, you put that down about 12 inches or so, and that's kind of the mattress. And then depending on the animal and your own personal interest, you can put down a top dressing of sawdust or something finer if you'd like to. But then the animals, that's the barnyard for the animals. And you would regularly put down new bedding on top of that. So the guide is really the animals. When the animals can lay down and stand back up without having any matting on their fur, you've got a nice system going on. When you notice that the bedding is starting to clump and get a little bit too wet, so that when the animals lay down and stand up and they are starting to show signs of staining or matting on their fur, then you know it's time to add more bedding. So this typically works out where on a really intensive dairy farm, they would put down new additions, new bedding, basically at every milking, or at least every day. So they've got a nice clean area, low somatic cell counts. On farms where there's not as much concern about the bacteria count, they can put it down every few days, where it's still, the animals are nice and dry. They're impressively clean, very clean animals with the system, but they will put that down every few days and just watching, but they're watching the bedding build up over time. And over a whole season, if everything has been spaced right, we've given the animals enough space, we can have 3 or 4 feet of bedding that's in there. What that does mean, of course, is that it takes a certain type of equipment to go in there and pull that out, and then to apply that to the land. So I should point out that for every recommendation or every change that we recommend, there is a cause and effect to this. So it's not always a simple path. There's going to be change with all this stuff. But a bedded pack is been extremely effective at this. When NRCS helps put these in, the bedded pack will have the concrete floor, 4-foot concrete walls to be able to build that bedding up, and then some type of a roof structure over that. And that's been working out quite well. Another option is if you do not have the roof over your concrete yard, there's still a lot of concrete yards out there. Another option, if you don't want to put the roof over it, is to have all that drainage collected in a large tank. So again, trying to find that closed system so that the manure and the runoff isn't leaving the farm. We can direct all that runoff to go into a large tank that collects over time. And then when the plants are looking for those nutrients, you would empty that tank into your manure spreader and take it out to the plants and feed the plants. That's the idea. So capturing everything in a tank, there is the option to keep the area clean, to keep the barnyard clean. So if you can scrape that very regularly and keep that barnyard cleaner, there's going to be a lot less loss from there. The idea, you would daily scrape pick it up and put it in your dedicated manure storage area. Then there's, of course, the grazing land and grass and grass or hayland that's out there. So this works much better. This only works actually during the growing season when we put you can daily spread and put the manure back out onto the land, ideally during the growing season. And so the growing season, we're getting the rainfall. We've got the temperatures to help the biology, the soil biology, to break down that manure and put those nutrients right back into the soil. Plants are working under the same temperatures. So the same biology is going on in the soil as is going on in the plants. So when the plants are doing their most growing, the soil is doing its most work, the soil microbiology, releasing that organic matter and using those nutrients. So spreading directly onto the land, either letting the animals go out and graze and drop in place, or to hang and do manure spreading. So common example with the barnyard is what you see on the left there. This happens a lot, and I don't mean to sound like it's a fault at all. That this is a very standard practice, but again, just looking for ways to improve and ways to capture loss that's on there. Some of the ways that we work to do that is this bedded pack that you see on the screen right there. And the basic objective with this is just that you have clean and therefore healthy animals. So trying to create a clean environment, a healthy environment. So all in the name of animal production that's on there. And then one of the environmental benefits is that you've got no mud. You've got no mud, you've got no manure hanging around outside. So storms or rain come along and wash that stuff away. You no longer have access to it. So some of the other things, instead of putting up a large structure, is that you can actually use bedding. You can use bedding material and you can absorb a lot of that stuff. One of the other benefits of using the bedding, even outside, is that, for example, if you use waste hay, the waste hay is usually cut long. And so that long cut is actually going to form a woven mat underneath the animals and give them a lot of support. So instead of stepping through the mud, sometimes it gets pretty deep. If you're using these long grass fibers and putting this down as bedding, it'll form a mat over time. And assuming that you're putting enough down for them to stand on, to keep standing on, similar to a bedded pack, they're going to have a clean, dry, and stable surface to walk on. And then, of course, in the springtime, you would have to go in with your equipment, pick it back up, and either put it into a pile for spreading later, or put it into compost. With the amount of moisture and manure that can be captured in that bedding, you can actually do some really good composting with it as well. Another option is if you've got the land, if you're a grazing operation, grazing in this instance would mean that you've got enough land that you are not supplementing the animals with additional feed. They go out, they've got enough acres to be able to get all their feed out there, and they're just rotating from pasture to pasture. If you've got a system set up like that, then you might be set up to be able to do this frequent moves where you put a bale of hay out there, they eat that bale of hay, and then you would immediately move them to a new area. They're gonna rough up that area where they're eating, and they're gonna drop a lot of hay down there. But if you can move that feeder before they damage the grass too much, damage the roots of the grass, if you've moved it and springtime comes, that grass will actually return. And it can return quite well, actually, because of all the liquid that went down as urine, and then also the manure that dropped there. It does pretty great things in terms of regeneration and coming back. Some people have also taken the advantage to use that as a reseeding. So they'll go down there, they'll go down and do some frost seeding. We had one person that actually put some cover crops in there. They wanted to make sure that they were breaking up the area. Lots of roots. Roots are amazing at helping the soil, improving the soil, breaking it up. That root allows for the soil water movement, allowing the water to go down through the soil. or when it gets dry, when there's enough water under the soil or in the soil, that water can come back up and keep those plants growing as well. So the roots really do amazing things. So so moving that feeder frequently from place to place and never going back to the same place, always new places, and making sure that there's not too much damage in any one place, you can move that around frequently. All right, so that's for the barnyard management. If you've got animals and they go out every day and you've got a barnyard, those are some of the ideas that we use for barnyard management. Switching just to manure management only, manure management in this case is looking at how to store that manure for approximately 6 months or so. The reason we're looking at the 6-month range is because that's generally about the time period where the plants are not growing and or the fields are wet enough or frozen enough that we would not recommend going out to the field. So if the fields are frozen, we don't recommend putting manure down because any precip or snowmelt that we get is just gonna run across that tabletop and go right to the nearest water source. This water. So if it's frozen, if it's too wet and you take your equipment out there, all you're going to be doing is compacting that wet soil. And soil compaction and plant growth are just, they're not good friends. Any kind of soil compaction, it's amazing how much effect it has on plant growth and plant yield. So we wouldn't recommend going out on wet soil. So by having manure storage for about 6 months or so, that gives you more options on when to go out to the field, waiting for a little bit drier day or better time to be able to put that down. So that's the reason for the manure storage. But some of the things that we commonly use are tanks, either above ground tanks or in-ground tanks. They can be pretty large sometimes. Looking at 6-month storage, you can imagine how much manure you collect within any time frame, within a week, a month. It gets pretty large. So so the tanks can get pretty large. We also use buildings, and when we use buildings again, we also look for that hard floor. Oftentimes we'll put walls in there of some sort, 4 foot or so on the location, and then also roofs, again, just to prevent that precipitation. If you don't have a roof, we would just encourage using some kind of an armored surface, so some type of a gravel or something to be able to get into there daily. And again, if it's wet, you don't want to be driving through the mud, getting deeper and deeper, or driving through the puddles. It just gets very unpleasant. So if you've got a nice hard surface to be able to work on, to be able to get to that pile every day, then the other aspect would be looking at some type of cover. So just quick and simple examples on this one. We've got a fairly smallish liquid manure storage over here. So if you've got any kind of liquid waste that you're working with, there's some opportunities to capture that waste. That bottom picture down there is obviously a roof structure. And again, something that's been people have been very interested in lately is the option to compost. The compost market has been pretty strong, much more strong since we went into our COVID situation. There's been a lot more interest in farming and gardening, and that's the market's been really good for the compost. So, and then, of course, the covered stack. Just one example. Again, it's an improved surface or an armored surface to be able to get there every day. And then this particular picture has done a really nice job of covering the stack. We do get a lot of comments about covering a stack, especially on windy days and some of the storms that we've had lately. So we do get comments on that. So just be aware of the challenges on there, but it is a good option. All right, so looking at the other source, again, the common losses that we see on the farms is we're looking at feed storage. Where is your feed stored? Is it in a form that is subject to loss on there? Granted, on some of the smaller farms, it tends to be a little bit different situation. Oftentimes a lot of bagged square bales that you can still lift up by hand. Oftentimes those things are stored under roof. The reason that they're often stored under roof is why? Why would you store things under roof? Yeah, exactly. The practicality of it. So there's the practicality of lifting up a wet bale, but then there's also the feed quality. So I was thinking about the feed quality. If you leave your bags outside, bags of grain outside, they're going to get wet and mush. If you leave your bales outside, they're going to get they'll get bleached or wet or so all kinds of reasons. So there are recommendations to store some of the feed under roof. That eliminates a lot of problems right there. Then we look again at the solid surface. So if it is a larger volume of feed that needs to be stored, we'll look at putting down a hard surface. They can get to that feed every day without problems, without mud. But if we've got that hard surface, that means that we're going to have runoff. And then just from the storm events hitting that pavement, so we've got the runoff event, but then we've also got what we call leaching. And so if we've got the material, the feedstock on this hard surface, whenever it rains or snow melts or just the packing of the feed itself, oftentimes there's going to be a little bit of leaching that comes from that feed. And that's just the slow leak or the slow leak of water as it goes through the feed and then comes back out. Even on a dry day, you might see those little trickles of wet coming from the feed area. And so if we can figure out a way to capture that little trickle has actually got a lot of stuff going on in it. It's got all that sugar or all that organic matter. And if that goes into a water system, what that means is that it's going to start decomposing almost immediately. That sugar is food for all the microorganisms in the water. And so the microorganisms in the water system start breaking that down. It's an aerobic process. It eats up a lot of oxygen in the water system. And that's how we end up with our anaerobic lakes and streams. And we lead to fish kills and other problems. So if we can capture that very valuable but high strength organic liquid, then we can put that back into manure storage, or we can put that back onto the land and use all that good organic liquid for plant growth and soil management. Feedstock, obviously another option is grazing. And so it is kind of interesting. It is really interesting actually on a lot of these operations. There's a really strong need to be able to manage the feed. People, if you're in animal production, you want to know exactly what those animals are eating, what's in their feed. And so it's been a pretty rigorous process to put that feed together just right. And as a result, we have seen less and less grazing over the years. We're seeing a little bit of a resurgence just locally where the cost of feed is getting really high. The labor to put up feed is getting even more high. And then there's the cost of equipment itself. So there's been a nice resurge of interest in getting some of the animals back out onto pasture. We've had some really good pasture trainings within the state just recently in the last few years. And there's a number of benefits that go along with just that grazing aspect. But one of them is letting the animals collect the feed and bring it in for you. And that's pretty valuable. So just some very quick examples here. Feed under storage eliminates a lot of problems. And then if you do have that armored area, being able to collect all the material that comes up. Well, to collect or manage, I should say. So in this image right here of the concrete area, that's a large area. You can imagine if rainwater hits that's going to be a lot of water. We do not have to collect and store all that water, but we do have to manage it. So I don't know if this is a good example or not, but similar to big parking lots, if you've got those big parking lots, a lot of those go to some sort of a storm basin now. And we're using some of the same concepts as that, where we'll send all of that water that's coming down in a big flush, put it into a storm basin to slow it down and give it time to either infiltrate into the soil or it can be spread on the land as well. Just being able to manage the water a little bit better, to have some options. All right, this one, not so much a pleasant subject, but a necessary one. Anytime you're working with animal farms, and that's mortality management. The reason this is a concern is to be able to manage disease, but also to be able to manage pests or vermin, other problems on the farm. And so some of the methods that we use with that is to, again, use a building. We can manage all the inputs and manage the pile much easier in a compost building. Under certain situations, it is very appropriate to compost outside. Right now, we're currently recommending that small quantities be done outside, but in a managed way. Just like with anything, if it's too much of too many animals or too large of a pile, that can lead to bigger problems as well. But with smaller piles, we say something on the order of 10 large animals a year to be able to create a pile and then have a nice area around that would be something like grass, that any runoff that does come off that pile can go right into the grass, ideally absorb into the soil or infiltrate into the soil, and then we can manage some of the runoff that way. Burial is certainly an option, but admittedly, in many parts of Connecticut, it's challenging because there's water everywhere, seemingly everywhere. We have a certain soil type that is near and dear to our hearts, the Paxton soil. Paxton soil is a wonderful soil that grows many of our crops in Connecticut, but it is what we call a glacial till soil, which means it's got a really hard layer about 18 inches under the soil surface. So as the glaciers were moving along, they were pressing and grinding that soil. They compressed that a lot. Over the years, we've got that 18 inches of soil or so that grow really good crops now. But anytime we get a saturating rain or a saturating snow melt, that water is seeping through the soil until it hits that hard layer. So if you've got a really nice moving water, and then it hits a hard layer, it's going to go through that layer, but very slowly. The rest of that water is going to move right along that lens, and it's going to find its way out. It'll either pop through, find a seep in a hill, or it'll keep moving down to the stream. But that means that in that 18 inches or so, you've got a lot of water that's having trouble moving down, so it starts moving across. Okay, so the reason that's significant is that we're looking for at least 2 feet of separation to any water. So if we look at that seasonal water table that we're talking about, if you look at spring, where the soil is very moist, that water table could be pretty high. We're looking for at least 2 feet of separation. And so if you imagine digging down so that you've got 2 feet of soil above your burial, then you've got the burial. And then we're looking for 2 feet above any water. So we're talking something on the order of, I would say, no less than 6 to 8 feet. Doesn't happen easily. Not around here, right? Yeah. So trying to meet that criteria is not easy. So I would just say that burial is an option, but just be aware of where that water is. And if you can't meet that water separation distance, then you've got other options that are really good. The composting is probably the most used right now that we're recommending, but there's always the option for removal from the farm. Here's that image, an image of what we would recommend for the composting. Basically, it's recommending about 2 feet on all directions of that animal. So about 2 feet of material under the animal. Again, we're looking for kind of a high carbon material under there. High carbon would be something like dried leaves, straw, wood chips, something that's very brown. When we talk about composting, we talk about browns and greens for carbon and nitrogen. The browns are carbon, the greens are often things like fresh hay, fresh feed, anything like that that's still got that green in it. It's got a lot higher nitrogen content in it. But on a composting system, we'd be looking for a nice organic, ideally carbon mattress underneath, and that's going to soak up anything that does come through that soil, come through the pile. all the nutrients. So we got 12 to 18 inches, or excuse me, about 2 feet below the animal, and then 2 feet on all sides. And that 2 feet seems to be about the magical number that is able to capture a lot of the smells. So it'll prevent things from being able to smell it so much, and then come in and dig in through the pile. So, and of course, by covering the pile, you've got all that good composting going on as well. But finding that material to put the good stuff on is very important. Yeah, question. Well, that's a fair question. Yes, the picture is of a cow. So off the cuff, I would offer that 2 feet is not bad. For a rabbit, that might be a little bit much. So I would say take it into consideration what it is, but sorry, just trying to think on the fly here. But with any kind of decomposition, you're going to get that smell, and I'm just thinking that with that nice carbon mattress, it is really going to help to capture a lot of that smell that's on there. So I would say a generous amount. How about that? It would help. But the type of material that you do put on there is going to have a big effect. If you were to just place dried leaves on there, it will work, but it's going to be very slow. Like, well, I was going to say painfully slow, but it's just going to be very slow. If you put something on there that's a little bit more hot, it's got a lot more greenness to it, like waste manure, the bedding material from the barn, from the animals, unfinished compost. If you've got a compost pile, you can grab some of that stuff that's not finished yet, put that on top of that. That stuff is going to start to cook, and it's going to cook really good. If you put a thermometer in there, depending on what you get, temperatures can easily get up to 140, 160, sometimes a little bit hotter. If it gets much hotter than about 160, 180, you want to start to do some changes. If it's 180 degrees and still climbing, you might want to get some water on there or get it aerated. There have been some old instances of combustion in compost piles. It is possible, not too frequent. Usually we're on the other end of the composting side where it's either too dry, there's not enough aeration, there's not enough air in the pile, or there's too much carbon. There's not enough nitrogen to get things to work quickly or fast, to get it hot. But if you're managing mortalities, you do want to get, it seems a good idea to get a pretty hot material. So get a nice green material, get that pile cooking. And even for large animals, we can see decomposition in about 3 to 6 months. And decomposition, I mean like complete. So no bones, no teeth, all that hard material that you think would never disappear. It does a really good job, the composting. And then just this visual for the burial. Again, pretty difficult around here. There are places, but not too frequent. All right, I'll go through this one pretty quickly just to mention that it's something that we work with a lot. Again, working with the dairies, dairies work with the milk houses. And so on all aspects, on all farms, we're looking for the waste streams. And these are some of the common methods that we use to get those. If you can imagine on a milk house, it's plumbed. So it's got water in and it's got drains out. So there's usually a way to be able to work with an existing milk house system to tap into that drain and then create a way to contain the water that comes out of there. And again, if you can imagine in a milk house, you've got animals coming in every day. So there's going to be urine, there's going to be manure droppings, and there's going to be a very clean milk houses. All the milk houses are impressively clean. They wash it down every day. So you've got all that drain water all coming out. And so we can capture all that, store it, and put it back on the land. Tanks are the most common. Septic systems, particularly on small farms, are increasingly common. The septic systems on a milk system do need to be designed specifically for the high fat, high solids product that's going through there. that is done frequently. And then hooking up to the town sewer system is an option. It takes a little bit of work, but in most cases, I should probably not say that. That's a conversation that could be had with the municipality, with the wastewater director often. But there's oftentimes good connections over there. It works out pretty well. Doesn't happen very frequently. It's expensive. There's, you have to often have to run lines, and then there's that fee based on per unit. But some people, it's a good option. So if you're capturing it at a tank, whether that tank is the manure tank, you can put it directly into the manure tank, or a dedicated tank just for the wash water. You can empty that tank and put it directly onto the land and get all the value for that. And then just a quick description that if you're using a septic system, just like with many of the homes, it goes into a tank, the solids separate down, the fats float on top, and the water goes out into a drainage field and goes down into the soil. And then the last one is stormwater. And this is a source of loss if it's going through your product area or through your work area. So if it's going through your barnyards or through your work area, then it goes from clean water to gray water, where it's carrying all that material with it. So the best thing that we can do is to divert that clean water, keep it clean water, and send it around the farm, sometimes under the farm, but get it out of the work area. So that way you don't have to mess with it when you're driving around the yard, trying to get chores done, and you don't have to worry about it going into the animal yard, keeping that animal yard wet or muddy. We can just keep that water clean and send it around. Some of the commonly used things like that would be to use a diversion, which would be a built-up mound that would intercept the water as it's coming down the hill and send it around. We can put some drains under there, do something like a French drain, and sink into the ground, go into a ground pipe, and then out to a good outlet. One of the most effective things, though, is capturing that roof water. So there's so much roof water, so much roof area on the barns. If we can capture that roof water, keep it from going into the animal yard, does a lot of good things for the animals, reduces a little bit of the mud, but mostly it keeps that water clean. So we don't have to deal with that roof water going into the animal yard. All right, so those are the common losses on many of the farms that we work with, on animal production farms. So assuming that we've gone through, we've identified what the losses are, now we've designed some ways to capture those losses and use them for gain. Now what do we do? How do we use them? So all those waste that we've captured, there is really a lot of good to them. If we can capture them, we've got the organic matter, all the microbiology that's going on in those things. Again, there's the decomposition process. If we look at just the manure alone, you've got all those for the ruminants, for the cattle and things like that. You've got all that microbiology that's in the gut that comes out the back end. And if we put that in the soil, a lot of good things can happen out there as well. So the microbiology in manure does fantastic things for the soil. And a lot of the animal production facilities, there's outside feed that's being brought in. That feed is balanced for animal nutrition, has a lot of micronutrients in it. Not I forget what the right word is, but when the animal consumes it, the animal's going to assimilate some of those nutrients, but some of those nutrients are going to come right out the back end as well. So now we've got that set of micronutrients in the manure. Again, it's just waiting to go back into the soil. The plants are going to be looking for the same micronutrients, and you can put them right back on the land. Depending on what you're capturing for the waste, there may be a good amount of water. Some of the seasons that we've had, except this year, we've had some dry years. 2019 was pretty dry. 2020 was looking a little dry there for a while. And there's more and more interest on capturing this water and then being able to use it later on for irrigation. And that is happening on some of these farms. If there is no land to use the material that you've captured, then what we look to then is exporting off the farm. Sometimes that can be a little bit more tricky, but there is a good amount of land in Connecticut that is hungry for both nutrients and for manures. Just to overly generalize here, a lot of the hayland could be much more productive than it is. There's a lot of low pH, there's a lot of soil nutrient levels. We probably see some pretty significant gains on the hayland if we were able to get some of these manures spread out to these other fields. But if you can find those farmers, those landowners that are looking for some of that material, whether it's vegetable gardeners, vegetable production, even orchards, but hayland is probably the most readily used for export. After hayland, or maybe even before hayland, is landscapers. Some of the landscaping operations are always looking for this material. They'll be able to put it together into a mix or do compost, and then either export as or sell as compost, or do a mix and sell it as topsoil, which works out pretty well for everyone. So there's certainly a lot of value to what we would formerly call waste, but the waste streams from the animal farms do have a lot of value, but only if you know what that value is. So I'm going to go off a little bit hard now on the value of testing. Testing, I totally will admit, is not a lot of fun to do, but the value behind it, I cannot argue or emphasize enough. So testing the manure, testing the soils for the nutrients is going to give you a lot more information. With that information, then you can then balance what the soil needs versus what you have available. And that's where we're going next, is this nutrient management portion of it. So, so balancing the nutrients on here. Again, we're trying to get those nutrients out to the plants when the plants need it the most. If we're looking at our growing season, we've got a lot of good things going for us here. This is a pretty amazing area to get to live in. We've got so much water. Most of the times we got so much water. We've got pretty decent temperatures most of the year round. So that gives us a lot of advantage already. If we're trying to figure out how to balance the animals to acres, what we generally will use that, again, just using the rule of thumb here, or a thumb's view, is that about 1,000 pounds of acre, 1,000 pounds of animal per 1 acre usually works out to be an okay balance, depending on what you have in your manure and depending on what you have in your soil. But that's a reasonable place to start when you're thinking about numbers in your head. 1,000 pounds of animals, about 1 acre. And that works out for the minimal amount of feed that you might produce for the animals. And it works out pretty well for the amount of manure that those animals will produce to put back onto that acre. So we're working on that cycle now. But again, emphasis on confirming what's in your manure and what's in your soil. So to take a manure test, it's actually not difficult. It's just not a lot of fun sometimes. But finding a clean bucket, grabbing a clean shovel. You want to make sure that it wasn't a shovel that you used to clean up the fertilizer. That would speed things just a bit. But you want to go around and collect samples from many different places on your manure pile if you're collecting it from a manure pile. If you have the option to collect manure samples while the manure is going out to the field, that's actually ideal because you get so many different samples. So, so a manure pile or a manure pit, it can have different separations in it, and you can get different values depending on where you are in the pile, or more specifically, more often in a liquid, you'll get separation within that liquid. So as the manure is going out to the field, a few loaders at a time, loader buckets at a time, take just a very little bit, put it in your 5-gallon bucket, set it in a shady spot or a cool spot, and then every wagon load that goes out, you take a little bit, put it in your 5-gallon bucket. pretty soon you've got half a bucket full, and you've got, let's say, 10 or 20 wagons that went out to the field. You mix that half a bucket up, you take out a scoopful, a handful, either put it in a plastic bag or you put it in the container that the lab sent you. There's at least one of the labs regionally. All you had to do is let them know that you're interested in their soil analysis or the manure analysis. They'll send you the soil bags, or they'll send you the manure containers with the screw-on lid for free. And then you will put your materials in there, fill out your form with your name. Be sure to clearly mark the soil or the manure sample with your name and where it came from. And then you will pay to ship that in, and you'll pay to have it analyzed. So that's how that system can work. Being able to take the samples as they're going out to the field. The downside is that you don't have the information as it's going to the field. You might be making an estimate how much you're putting down there, but you will have the benefit with your analysis, with your lab test results, of then knowing what you did put out there. So if you keep your soil tests over a period of time, over time, you'll be able to see a very strong trend. Hopefully, you'll see a very strong trend in consistency with your manure values, and you'll get to know what your values are. And then you can count on those numbers being a little bit more consistent. But that comes with time. So you have to take them over time regularly, and you have to keep those results, and so you can track those results. But going back to the sample, so you mix the bucket, you place that in the sample bag, and then you send that off quickly to the soils lab, the manure lab. The reason that you want to do that quickly is because there's a lot of biology going on in there. It's wet, it's warm, and funny things start to happen when you get decomposition going on there. There's a lot of gas. On many occasions, there will be instances of stuff that had too much gas. You get a messy sample. Okay, so going back to the value of manure, though, there really is a lot of value. Just to give you some idea of how much manure is produced from different animals, that first column, manures per year, in tons, it adds up very quickly. There's a lot of manure that's produced from the animals. But for every ton of manure that is produced, that's got the fertilizer in it. So when we talk about fertilizers, we're talking about the three, what we refer to as the three macronutrients, the three nutrients that if they're not there, the plant will not grow. And that's the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium, the NPK. When you go to a store and you're looking at the fertilizer bags and you see the three numbers, like 10, 10, 10, that's the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium. Okay? So these are the equivalent fertilizer values. So you can see for every ton of dairy manure, we've got 10 pounds per ton of nitrogen, 3 for potassium, 3 for phosphorus, and 6 for potassium. Okay. So we'll take those values, and then so I got ahead here. We'll take those values and then we'll use that to estimate how much fertilizer we have that's going to get spread. So manure testing was the first step. Soil testing is the second step. So I equate soil testing, or any testing really, as the equivalent of having a map. So there's two things with a map. One, you have to know where you are on the map, and then you got to know where you want to go. If you don't have one of those two things, your map is pretty worthless, right? So imagine going to a new place. You want to travel to the good restaurant that somebody recommended. Unless you know where you're starting from, there's no way to get there. And I equate the same thing with the soils. Unless you know where you're starting from with your soils, it's very difficult to be able to manage that soil to know where you want to be. What we're trying to do is we're trying to get to that optimum range. If we can get up to the optimum range, what that's calculated as the soil nutrient range, where we're going to get the maximum crop yield. Maximum crop yield means that if you were to add more fertilizer above that range, the plant wouldn't care. The plant is already growing as fast and as hard as it can. No matter how much more fertilizer you put on it, it can't grow anymore. It's at its maximum yield. All right, so there's a magical level in there where if you can hit that line right, you've added enough fertilizer or enough nutrients to get that plant to grow to its maximum value, but you haven't added more that you're wasting fertilizer, wasting money, wasting time, wasting fertilizer. So if we can work to getting those soil nutrient values to the optimum range, then we're going to get our optimum yields and find that balance. So again, just how to take a soil test. I would urge you to make a map of your farm and all the fields that you want to test, and then put a name or a label on those fields so that you know, or anybody else can know, where those soil samples came from and what name you call them. The tricky part with some of these soil labs, that they give you a very small space to put the names. So sometimes you can't use your full name, like Martha's field behind the barn. That will not fit on the label. So you have to come up with a quippy, either a number, you can number your labels, or you can come up with a very short label. Point being, you need to know what that label is that you're going to write down on your soils bag and then submit to the lab, so that when you get the lab results and it has that name on it, you can either give that map to somebody so that they know where to go and which field that is, or if you hand it in to somebody else or you look at it a few years later, you know where it is. All too often, we have a lot of soil samples sitting around, soil test results that we don't know where they came from, because either the person that took the soil samples doesn't remember what they called it, or the person that has the soil test results has no idea where that soil sample came from. So creating a map is actually really helpful. So first create the map, then go get the supplies. The supplies would be the clean bucket, a spade or a soil sampler works really well too. A clean bag, making a joke, not the sandwich bag. Be sure to label I find it much easier to label the bags before you go out there. That way you're not fumbling around with the markers and trying to remember what names it were. You got your map, you got your bags, label them all right up there at the table. Then you go out to the field and you will walk a single field. So I guess we're lucky in Connecticut that our average field size in Connecticut is 8 acres. Not too big, right? So they recommend that a soil test represent no more than 10 acres. So on a lot of our individual fields, we're within that 10-acre recommendation. But we would walk that field in some type of pattern to make sure that it's very random. So you're getting lots of different places. Recommend testing anywhere from 10 to 20 subsamples. So about 10 times or so, you'd go through, you grab a little spade slice from the top 6 inches of the root zone, the growing zone for that soil. You grab that spade slice and put it in your bucket. You walk to the next one, spade slice, put it in your bucket. You do that 10 times, 10 or 20 times. At the end of that, you've walked randomly through your field. You can mix that bucket up, mix that soil up really good. Take out a handful, put it in your labeled bag. At the end of the day, send that bag off to soil testing. If you can't send it off the same day or within a day or so, leave the bag open or find a way to dry the soil. If you air dry the soil, that can be a really good thing too. Prevents things from getting muddy or smelly or moldy. And just a quick note that the air drying for nutrients works, air drying for phosphorus and potassium testing works really well. If you were to do soil testing for nitrogen, air drying does not work so well. Air drying does work pretty well. The change would be if right now a popular thing is testing for soil health. There's a soil health test out there that a few different labs do. If you're going to be testing for soil health, you do want to make sure that the soil stays moist and or cool, and that you get that sent to the lab as quickly as possible. Again, because of the biology that's going on in there, it'll change some of the stuff that's going on. So, if your soils are wet and you're going to test for phosphorus and potassium, just standard nutrient analysis. You can leave that bag open, let it dry, or close it up and send it right off to the lab. Everything I just said there. Walk randomly. The one difference on here, well, the one difference would just be if you've got a nice soil, a nice field, it's assuming there is an assumption that the field is fairly uniform in there. If there are areas that are not the same, you've got plants that are noticeably growing different, or areas where you know the plants grow differently, either much shorter or much taller, then you can take that area and sample that separately. That's something different going on in there. So you have a choice of testing that area separately, and then you can test your bad area or test your good area or test your different areas, whatever that is. So if things are fairly uniform, just take the one sample. If you've got some areas that are noticeably different, you can take more than one sample and send it in. That was a very, very quick, rough explanation of how to take a soil test. For any soil test lab that you want to work with, they will have information how to take a soil sample and how to submit a soil sample. Highly encourage you to read that. We just had a funny example the other day where somebody went out and they took their soil samples, and then they read the directions and they said, whoops, gotta go back out. So the whole thing about reading directions, it can be very helpful. Some of the commonly used labs just within this region, Yukon gets a lot of use. We're very familiar with those soil test results. But Woods End, University of Maine does a nice job, Dairy One, and of course the Connecticut Ag Experiment Station, they still do soil testing for free. So that's always an option as well. All right, just to give you some idea of the soil test results, what that'll look like, I'm just using an example from Yukon. I had easy access to some of those soil test reports. So in just a few days, you'll get that test result back. What the test results have is what they found in the soil, but then they'll also have the recommendations as well. So just to give a little close-up of that same test, what we're looking for, again, is that optimum range. And so this is just a very simple visualization. Where do your soils stand in terms of reaching that optimum? So again, if we were just to focus on the phosphorus and potassium in this example, right on the money with the phosphorus, potassium, what this test result is saying is that if we were to add some potassium fertilizer to the soil, we would expect to see a yield increase from here. So it is possible that the lack of phosphorus is holding back the crop yield just a little bit. So if we boost that potassium level in the soil up to optimum, we would expect to see a yield increase. Right below the results section is the recommendations section, and it's been broken down into two portions of recommendations. There's the one recommendation right at the top, circled in green here, that is what to do most immediately. So I'm going to call that year one. What do you do in year one is to put down a little bit higher rate of fertilizer if there are deficiencies. So if the soil is a little bit lower or in need, you can put down a little bit extra fertilizer than what the plants are going to use, and you can build that soil nutrition up. And then in the area below that green box, I'll show another example here. Okay, yep, sorry, here we go. If you can see the pointer down on the very bottom of the screen, the green box at the very bottom, I've been calling that the year 2 and year 3 recommendations, and that's what I would call just the maintenance application. So every year that you're growing crops, the crops are going to be taking up nutrients. As you harvest that crops, you're then removing the nutrients from the soil and from the field. So if we put down a maintenance application, I'm going to say a modest amount, a similar amount to what the crops are removing. If you put that maintenance application down every year, we should be able to maintain your soil nutrient levels at optimum. So that's what we're shooting for. In this particular example, I just wanted to give you an idea of what a higher soil test phosphorus would look like. So this one, all I wanted to point out was just that you can't have nutrients that are too high. And again, all that in this instance, all that's implying is that there was some wasted time or wasted energy, wasted money. The plant is not going to be able to use this much phosphorus. So if we're able to cut back on the phosphorus or save on the phosphorus, over time, the plant is going to continue to consume that phosphorus. The soil test phosphorus levels will drop over time, come back down to optimum, and then we have more efficient use by the plant, but we have less to be concerned about in terms of environmental loss too. We don't have to worry about that phosphorus leaving the field and ending up where we don't want it. So if we have nutrient values that are greater than optimum, then that yellow box down in the middle, I don't know if I have a mouse here, yellow box down in the middle is going to show that they would not recommend adding phosphorus. Where things are below optimum, green box next to it, or my pointer's disappearing here, but it shows just adding a slug of potassium, bring that level back up. Any questions on that one? Fairly straightforward. So you've got your soil test results. You're able to estimate how much manure to apply to start working for this balance. So the example here is just if your soil test is recommending 30 pounds of phosphorus per acre, you did your manure test, and your manure test is showing you that you've got 3 pounds of phosphorus for every ton that you put down. Some simple math, 30 divided by 3, you would estimate that you need about 10 tons of manure per acre to put down there. And just a quick word of advice, I guess, is that a 10-ton application on grass seems to be pretty nice. If you go much above 10, much above 15, then you'll start to get matting. It's going to be too much manure on top of the grass. It'll start to mat the grass down, lay it down, and then you get clumpy grass. But a 10-ton of the application, give or take, it's got a nice even application. It's enough to fall down between the grass, and you can get a really nice fertilization rate with around 10 tons to the acre or so. So ideally, we'd be looking to apply the nutrients when the crops need them. Again, that's during the growing season. It's really neat how the biology works and the chemistry works. For anyone that has grown crops, one of the things that you look at is the soil temperature. You don't want to put the seed in the ground when the soil is too cold, because the biology is not going to work. The roots aren't going to grow, or they're not going to grow as fast. But when that soil warms up, the plant growth speeds up. But in addition to the plant growth, again, that soil microbiology is also going to be speeding up. So breaking down the manures, releasing those nutrients, making those nutrients available for the plant at the same time that that plant is growing. If the manure is applied when the plants are not growing, either as fast or at all, if you can use some type of a cover crop, assuming on something like a bare soil, so a cropped field, vegetables, corn, silage around here, if you can use a cover crop, that cover crop can do really amazing things. If you can get that cover crop established, nicely established in the fall, I'm going to say around 6 to 8 inches or so of growth in the fall, that's going to be storing those nutrients in both the roots and the shoots. And then as it goes through the wintertime and comes springtime again, and it starts to grow, you can get as much as 80 to 100 pounds of nitrogen just in the roots and shoots. And so if you keep all that material on there, return that back into the soil and get that cycle going, you've just saved about 100 pounds of nitrogen to the acre, 80 to 100. The lower, the less the plant is, the shorter the plant, less roots, less shoots, less nitrogen. but it is a great way to store the nitrogen and all that organic matter, and then to get to reuse that nitrogen again the following season. So cover crops, nutrient retention, but also preventing soil erosion. Anything you can do to slow down that water going down the hill. The chutes are going to interrupt that water as it's flowing down. The more you can interrupt that water, you're going to slow it down and you're going to disperse it. The more you slow it down, the more you disperse it, the better chance that water has of infiltrating into the soil. We do lose a pretty impressive amount of soil every year to soil erosion. Anytime you see the little rivulets of where the water went away, just a simple example is that if you were to take a 6-inch by, I forget what my dimensions were, but let's say 6-inch by 3-inch gully that ran down the field, just that small little gully, something you could easily drive over and not even notice. That one gully could fill up the back of your pickup, which is just the amount of soil that was lost from it. So if you can imagine replicating that over your entire field, over the entire operation, the amount of soil loss that can happen just due to bare soil, it gets pretty amazing. And most of the time that soil is the most valuable part of the soil. It's the smallest parts that leave first. And the smallest parts is actually where most of the chemistry is going on. So all those fertilizers that you bought and paid for and put down, a lot of that chemistry is happening on those small particles, and those are the first ones to wash away. So the more of the soil that you can keep on your land, keep it for growing crops, the better off you're going to be. So roots and shoots are going to help with that. Another recommendation, if you're applying anytime, whether it's during the growing season or outside of the growing season, is to keep some distance away from any of the waters. So if you have an area of the field that you know is going to receive heavy flow, can't think of the right word, the concentrated flow of water that's going down through the field, like a waterway or just a heavy area. If you could skip that part where you know that the water is going to be flowing and washing, if you can skip that part, that would be great. And then if you've got an area of the field that might be really close to water, close to a pond or close to a stream, if you could move your manure line back a little bit, do a setback or a buffer. We recommend at least 35 feet, more if it's steeper, more yet if you're doing a heavier application. The further back you move, the more opportunity you have for hopefully something like a grass area, or even if it is soil, more opportunity for that runoff to be able to infiltrate into the soil, pull those nutrients into the soil, rather than running off the soil and into the water. That's why we're looking for setbacks or a buffer area with manure applications. So I'll go through this kind of quick, but just wanted to offer, again, I work with USDA and RCS. One of the programs that we work with a lot is this program that we call EQIP. It's a farm bill program. So every 5 years or so, you hear in the news, Congress is working on a farm bill, to pass for agriculture and other social services. But it's that farm bill that allows local farms access to this EQIP project. This EQIP project is designed to help improve existing problems. So it's not too good at preventing problems before they happen, but the way that the program was set up many years ago now, that there were a lot of problems existing. They put this program in place to be able to solve some of those existing problems. And so we now can use that same pot of money to try to solve some of the problems that are out there. A lot of the money goes towards soil erosion, manure management, pasture management, a lot going into forestry right now as part of a land management. And then irrigation is increasing quite a bit too, because of the fluctuations that we're seeing in some of our seasons now. But this is it's a program that helps to, the simple word is cost share. But in this instance, just want to emphasize that it is a reimbursement program, which means that the farm is responsible for paying the bills. After the project is installed and completed and checked off by NRCS, after it's checked off by NRCS, then there is a reimbursement that comes back to the farm. So those reimbursements are made on a flat rate, so it's $1 per unit. Now that I want to emphasize, it's $1 per unit. That $1 per unit was calculated or estimated to be about 75% of the expected cost. That is by no means exact. So that's why. Yeah.
It is why it's meant for the folks here, we are the river watershed, the watershed, so the reimbursement rate.
Gotcha. Yes, thank you. Yes, so what was mentioned there is that, again, part of the reason that this meeting is happening is because of the Little River watershed. The Little River watershed is an important area. There's a lot of agriculture going on here. Because of that importance and the watershed and the emphasis on the watershed, it is in a special, will be in a designated area that has special monies just to go towards these projects. So it's got a special pot of money just for the projects, and it has a higher reimbursement rate. So instead of using the flat rate that was estimated at 75%, there's a different flat rate that's estimated at 90% cost share. So it's a higher reimbursement rate because of the special designation. So the example I used in here was just for manure storage, pretty popular project that we work on a lot. So your manure storage area would be based on how much cubic feet of how much volume of manure that we'd be planning to store. If we put a roof over that manure storage, that would be based on square foot of roof. We can help put a work pad, concrete drive pad in front of that building for all the equipment that needs to go in there. And then we can also help put in an armored or reinforced road, gravel road from where you need to, from the road up to the storage area, so you can get in and out easily. The other benefits is NRCS will come out, they'll do an assessment. There can be some engineering done, but the caveat by signing up with this government with the government project is that all the projects must meet the government standards. So they have to meet the NRCS specifications for all the projects. So we just encourage you to be sure that you have some understanding of what the specifics are and make sure that that's something that you want to do. And that's really all I've got for you tonight. So very happy to take any questions. I do love this topic and this project. I could talk for way too long on all this stuff. So.
For those of you that are tuned in via Zoom, if you want to type in your question into the chat, I will read it to Jim.
Thank you. Yes, question over here. Gotcha. I recommend testing at the same time every year. So if you can find a time that works consistently for you, if you can take the soil test at the same time every year, you're going to be in really good shape. I will offer that the soil test labs get very busy in the springtime. They get quite busy at what we call June nitrate testing time, when those farmers are testing for nitrates in the soil. So in the fall, they're a little bit less busy. So the soil test lab will often encourage fall testing for other people, because they do get a good slug in the spring. They get pretty busy. Good question. Well, it is the main nutrient that we're working with in this area. There's a few reasons for that. Oftentimes we'll look at phosphorus because that is the nutrient. That is the nutrient that's oftentimes needed in the least amount by the plants. So the plants will take up a lot of nitrogen. They'll take up a nice amount of phosphorus, and they'll take up quite a lot of potassium. So if we were to look at a visual of that, a lot of nitrogen, a little bit of phosphorus, quite a lot of potassium. So we can often meet the plant's needs, the soil's needs, first with phosphorus. So that's why that's one of the reasons that we look at the phosphorus. The other reason, just for this area, for the area of Connecticut, some of the manure applications used to be made for the nitrogen value. So if you add enough manure that you meet the nitrogen needs, you've then exceeded what the plant and soil needs for phosphorus. So if we keep meeting the phosphorus, the nitrogen need, we add more manure until we get up to that nitrogen need. That means that we've added too much phosphorus every time. So if you make multiple manure applications year after year after year, you're adding more phosphorus than the plant needs. You're going to store that phosphorus in the soil until the soil gets so full of phosphorus that it can't hold on to it very well anymore. And there is a saturation in the soil. Our soil does an amazing job of holding on to things with the amount of iron and aluminum and some of the organic matter that's in the soil. Those things do a truly impressive job of holding on to phosphorus. But once we've added so much phosphorus that the soil can't hold on to those very easily anymore, that phosphorus goes back and forth into the soil solution, the water that's between the soil particles and what's holding on to the soil. And so if we get a big flush, that soil water will flush out of the soil and go down to the stream. If there is any erosion, any of that phosphorus that's holding onto the soil, and that soil gets washed away, all that phosphorus ends up in the water as well. So another reason that we're looking to balance the soil nutrients, keep those soil nutrients in the optimum range. That's that optimum range again is for the agronomy value of growing crops. If we have added too much phosphorus and we're saturating the soil with phosphorus, that saturation point is what we call the environmental critical value. That's the point where we put phosphorus down, that the soil is having trouble holding onto it, and it becomes then an environmental concern that too much phosphorus is leaving the soil, either on the soil particles from erosion or from the soil water as that chemistry is working back and forth in soil solution. Great observation though, nicely done.